BHP leads the share market to a 2-month high. COVID case numbers surge as the latest variant of Omicron takes hold. And while no one seems to like coal miners at the moment, they sure are making record profits. It's Wednesday, the 23rd of March, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. I'm looking forward to today's show.
Any particular reason?
It's the story about the coal miners making so much money because it's such a vexed question. Everyone knows we need to transfer to renewables, but we also need to keep the lights on. And the coal miners are just doing so well. In fact, they're expanding. So it's just such a tricky topic. Looking forward to it.
Now, immediately after the show, stay listening, Sean. Today you're speaking to Peter Colaccino, the Chief of Policy and Research at Infrastructure Australia. We'll have a bit more information about that one later on, but that is a really, really interesting chat just about the billions of dollars that is going into infrastructure at the moment and some of the problems with the whole sector that's holding it all back. But more on that one later. First, Sean, we need to talk about the local equity market. Leader BHP jumped 5% yesterday, which is a pretty remarkable one-day rise.
Yes, particularly given there was no specific news from the big Australian yesterday. At $48.81 a share, it's not that far off its highs of last year. So what's going on? Well, iron ore prices are rising, we know that. So too oil prices. Brent crude is heading back to $120 a barrel after soundings out of Europe, particularly Germany, that maybe the continent would ban Russian oil, just like the US has done. And of course, BHP digs up iron ore and extracts oil. Copper prices, another major BHP commodity, are also high, hence the share price rose. But 5% on one day without a specific reason is quite incredible.
Well, I'm guessing then with a fairly good day for commodities, the other miners did pretty well as well.
Yeah, they did. Rio Tinto jumped more than 3%, while Fortescue was up 1.3%. They're the big iron ore miners. The gold diggers outperformed. Market leader Newcrest rose almost 3%, and Northern Star Resources was up about 2.5%. The oil and gas groups did well too, with Woodside up 1.3% and Santos heading towards 2% higher. Lithium group Pilbara Minerals jumped nearly 5%. Diversified miner South 32 did really well. Even the companies that do work for the miners, like Mineral Resources, have done pretty well recently. Its share price rose nearly 5% yesterday. Definitely a good day to be a miner.
Sean, you've told me previously that BHP is so big that if it has a big jump, then typically it'll kind of pull the rest of the market up. How did the overall market go yesterday?
Yes, I'm pleased you remembered that.
I listen. I genuinely do listen, Sean.
The market itself finished up 0.9% to 7,341 points, 7,341 points. If you took BHP out of that market rise, you probably would have been about flat. The market itself is now at a 2-month high. It's only about 4% off its record of August last year. And it didn't get a great lead-in from Wall Street yesterday morning, though comments from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell were welcomed across the board. Chairman Powell prepared investors for bigger interest rate rises in the US, saying nothing would prevent the Fed from raising rates by 0.5 percentage point in May, should it want to. And he said the Fed would keep moving by 0.5 percentage point if needed. Now, that sort of commentary hits bond markets more than equity markets. He triggered a sell-off in bond yields around the world. In Australia, the 3-year bond rate rose above 2% for the first time since 2018, and 10-year bond rates are at 2.7%. What's really interesting about that, when you're getting that sort of yield, you will find investors suddenly becoming a little bit more interested in the bond market, which is something that hasn't happened for quite some time with such low interest rates. Now, local traders think the Reserve Bank of Australia will start lifting interest rates around the middle of this year and have priced in 6 increases, which would take the cash rate from the current level of 0.1% to about 1.5% by the end of the year.
Yet, locally, though, the Reserve Bank does seem pretty content at the moment just to sit and wait, though, Sean.
It does. Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe was at a journalists' award event yesterday. He was asked about local interest rates. He said there was a shift in inflation going on, but it's not clear how pervasive it is. He added that the central bank is looking to see what happens to wages growth. But Michael, I agree. The pressure is on Philip Lowe, the governor, and the board of the Reserve Bank to do something.
Sean, question without any notice whatsoever. You obviously take in a lot of what everyone's saying, the economists and a lot of the journalists reporting the speculation and the pressure building on the Reserve Bank. When do you think rates would rise based on what everyone is saying?
I think it'll definitely be this year. I don't think it'll be May, and I don't think it'll be June. I think it'll be some point after that. Having said that, the Reserve Bank is criticised for its forecasts, but the economy is such a big moving beast. It will move when it thinks interest rates need to be moved. On what Philip Lowe has been saying, it's hard to see them going before the end of the year, simply because he wants to see this sustainable wages growth and sustainable inflation, and you need quarterly readings to make sure it's sustainable. However, they can change their mind. Anyway, the upshot of that, I didn't really want to give an answer to that, but I would say the second half of the year and probably towards the end of it.
All right, there you go. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Prime Minister Scott Morrison yesterday called opposition leader Anthony Albanese gutless and accused him of being in complete hiding following bullying allegations of late Senator Kimberley Kitching.
Yes, we've talked about this for a few days now. The tragic death of Senator Kitching has become very political, and Scott Morrison is leading the way in that. He called on Mr Albanese to not dismiss the allegations and said he should investigate the toxic culture within the Labor Party. He then tied it straight to Mr Albanese's ability to be Prime Minister. Pretty shameless, I think. It will be interesting, though, Michael, to see how the electorate views this attack by Mr Morrison. Politics is not a pretty business, and both sides of politics do it. They're quite ferocious at it. But sometimes people don't like what's going on, and I suspect actually using the death of a senator from whatever side of politics is not a good look for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, I think you're right there. There's just something just really, really unpleasant, just really quite disturbing about the way a death is being politicised. It doesn't leave anyone coming out of this looking good.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, moving on. Sean, the Chief Executive Officer of the Star Group, Matt Beckier, is under fire over comments he allegedly made about a report into the casino group's failure to tackle money laundering.
A New South Wales inquiry has heard that Mr Beckier labelled the KPMG report, which was critical of the Star, as unacceptable and wrong in an audit committee meeting. He said there were multiple errors and KPMG didn't know what they were doing. The group's former Chief Risk Officer, Paul McWilliams, said he agreed with KPMG's report, though the severity of the findings were worse than he expected. Now, the author of the report also testified and said Mr Beckier was hostile towards him. The inquiry, of course, is considering whether the Star is fit to hold a gaming licence, and last week heard that the company disguised as hotel expenses about $900 million in transactions linked to Chinese high rollers. The inquiry is continuing.
Sean, there were some figures released yesterday about COVID. This came out from Professor Adrian Esterman, who's an epidemiologist from the University of South Australia and a COVID expert. And the figures show that 99% of COVID cases now are the Omicron variant.
Yes, and of that, 60% of infections are the latest variant of Omicron, BA.2, while 39% are the original Omicron variant. The virus is taking the course that experts predicted. It's becoming more infectious but less harmful. That's actually good news. There are still plenty of new cases each day, though. Infections in Queensland yesterday, for example, were 9,000. That's up 15% over the past week. New South Wales recorded 21,000 new cases. Victoria was at 9,600 infections. There were 3,700 cases in South Australia, and that state expects the number of new daily cases to double over the next fortnight. It's reinstated a ban on non-urgent elective surgery. The ACT recorded 1,000 new cases yesterday, and Tasmania more than 1,800 infections.
Sean, there are a few bits and pieces of economics news around yesterday. Consumer confidence, for one, has taken a bit of a tumble.
Sure has. The ANZ Roy Morgan weekly measure of consumer confidence fell nearly 5% last week to its lowest level since the height of the pandemic back in September 2020. Guess why, Michael?
I could take a punt. I would say it's something to do with petrol prices.
Absolutely. You have been listening.
I do. Look, and you know what, Sean? It's a pretty depressing state when you get excited to find petrol for under $2 a litre. which I did
Yes.
lately. And I saw it and you instantly fill up, even though it now takes about $120 to fill the tank.
But then have you noticed around some of the areas where I live, when there's somewhere as an independent retailer at 199 cents a litre, then you get these massive queues out onto the road. So you end up with traffic jams.
And suddenly any money that you actually save by getting the sub $2 a litre petrol is lost in the amount of time that you actually spend sitting there in the traffic.
Yeah, and it's ridiculous, irrational. We digress. Let's get back to rationality, which is what economics is about, of course. Now, these petrol prices, which is hurting consumer confidence, could dent near-term spending by households. That's a concern there. Household spending had increased ahead of this jump in petrol prices. In fact, Bureau of Statistics figures show that household spending increased by more than 4% in January compared to a year earlier. Recreation and culture and food led the way. Of course, January was when restrictions along the East Coast started being eased.
Now, Sean, you said you were excited about this. So here it is. Coal miners, and in particular coal miner New Hope, said profits have jumped to an 11-year high of $330 million.
Yes, and that's after a $55 million loss a year ago. The turnaround is incredible. While many market watchers don't really like coal companies for environmental reasons, they are certainly throwing out plenty of cash for shareholders. Thermal coal prices hit records late last year, hence the massive profit for New Hope for the year ended 31 January. But prices are up even more since then. New Hope's share price jumped 7% yesterday. It's up 36% this year and almost 140% over the past year. It's now in a position where it has no debt and has about $500 million sitting in the bank. It's also got an overdraft facility of about $400 million. So it's got nearly $1 billion to spend if it wants. Will it pivot towards renewables? Well, no. Boss Rob Bishop said he was bullish on coal and will expand in thermal and metallurgical coal given the opportunity. Renewables aren't off the table, but they have to provide an adequate return, he said. That's fair enough. He's representing shareholders. But this dilemma for coal companies, particularly, less so gas companies, to transition away from dirty fossil fuels while they're making so much money is really tough. Last week, Prime Minister Scott Morrison talked about demand for coal rising until at least 2030. So it's a really interesting conundrum, and I don't really come down on the side of saying being anti-coal or pro-coal. Eventually, we have to get to renewables. The sooner we do that, the better. But also, I don't want the lights to go out. It's just this fascinating structural change in energy that we're living through.
And Sean, to that same point, the Prime Minister has said that gas could fill the void as the economy shifts away, as you say, from coal. But then the competition regulator is now warning of gas shortages.
Absolutely. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission yesterday said Australia's East Coast gas market faces supply shortfalls from 2024 as Queensland LNG producers and exporters won't keep enough gas aside for the local market. It'll get worse beyond 2024, according to the ACCC. This is not an easy challenge to deal with, but absolutely fascinating.
Sean, there have been few sectors that have been hit as hard over the last couple of years as the travel and tourism sector. So it's probably pretty good news for them that the federal government's going to spend $60 million to help lure foreign tourists back to Australia after being pretty much closed for 2 years.
Yes, exactly. Or as the Prime Minister Scott Morrison put it yesterday in a very ochre manner, he wants bums on seats. Tourism Australia apparently has been given $45 million, including money for advertising in key international markets to boost visitor numbers to regions most reliant on tourism. And Michael, just quickly before we leave politics, in New South Wales, a Liberal MP is under pressure to quit after historical sexual assault allegations were made against him. Gareth Ward has been charged with assault in 2013 and sexually abusing a man in 2015. He denies the claims.
All right, Sean, a couple of quick ones. Building materials group Boral said earnings have been hit by the bad weather in New South Wales and Queensland and also by sharp increases in fuel and coal prices.
Yes, that's right. That triggered a big sell-off yesterday. Boral's share price fell 3%.
And Sean, Ramsay Healthcare has confirmed that an offshore buyer wants its Ramsay Sime Darby Healthcare joint venture in Asia.
Quite the mouthful. It's a joint venture, not surprisingly, with Sime Darby Holdings, hence Ramsay Sime Darby Healthcare. Anyway, the two have been offered $1.8 billion for it. Ramsay's share price moved about 1.6% yesterday on the back of it.
And hopefully the marketing team is called in to come up with a catchier name for that joint venture.
Hopefully.
All right, moving on to overseas news, Sean, and the war in Ukraine continues.
Yes, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday called upon Ukrainians living under occupation of Russia's invading forces to drive out the occupiers through force and continued peaceful protests. It's not quite a stalemate, Michael. Russia is definitely advancing, but only slowing. Mr. Zelensky said direct talks with Vladimir Putin were key to ending the war.
And Sean, I don't know if you've seen the images of the plane crash from China. Absolutely horrifying. There are no signs of survivors from the China Eastern Airlines Boeing 737 crash yesterday morning.
Yes, they are some of the most horrific things you will see when you realise there were 132 people on board. All are believed to have perished. There's no sign of life around the crash site. The domestic flight hit mountains in southern China, and the cause of the crash is under investigation, but very, very sad.
Now, Sean, a slight change of pace for our last story of the morning. It's actually not that often that we get to talk about Nerf guns on Fear and Greed, is it?
No, and you've got young children. You'd have a house full of Nerf guns.
You don't even need young children to enjoy Nerf guns. In fact, I had a very large collection before any kids even came into our household. I shouldn't really admit that. Please go on.
No, well, the bullets of those Nerf guns, though, I still find that my kids have well and truly outgrown Nerf guns. But years later, just occasionally in the garden shed or something, there's a Nerf gun bullet.
Down the back of the couch. Always.
Yes. But we can talk about it today because Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway will pay nearly $12 billion to buy an insurance-based conglomerate called Allegheny that owns everything from machine tools and truck bodies to funeral products and Nerf guns. There's a connection. It's Berkshire's first major takeover in 6 years and the fifth biggest acquisition it's ever done. Now, Warren Buffett and his offsider Charlie Munger, who's a few years older than Mr. Buffett, I think they're 94 and 91 years old respectively, have had a bit of a problem. They've been trying to get rid of about $150 billion in cash over the last few months, but they just haven't really found any good deals. Anyway, they found one today with the insurer that they've bought out. Shareholders loved it. Berkshire's share price hit an all-time high 24 hours ago. It's up 40% over the past 12 months, and Mr. Buffett is certainly back in fashion.
It's not really a problem that many of us can empathise with, is it? Having $150 billion in cash that you just can't find a home for.
I once interviewed Warren Buffett, and he told this story. I mean, I was one of 10 people interviewing him, and he told this story of he and Bill Gates once going out for dinner and afterwards trying to get a taxi, and how they thought it was quite funny that it was like 9 o'clock at night and they were both trying to get home to bed. And it was in Omaha, which is where Berkshire Hathaway is based. But the two richest men in the world at the time trying to thumb a lift from a taxi and couldn't do it. Pre-Uber, mind you. Great story, though.
Yeah, there's so many questions that come out of that, as in, why didn't they have cars picking them up? Who paid for dinner? Like, it's just these are the struggles of multi-billionaires, things that we don't have to deal with, Sean.
No, thank God.
That's right. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. And today, Sean, I mentioned before, you're speaking to Peter Colaccino, who's the Chief of Policy and Research at Infrastructure Australia.
Yes, Peter is fantastic to talk to. His knowledge on infrastructure is beyond anyone else I know. And as he puts it, and he's 100% right, all of us need infrastructure. We turn the tap on, that's infrastructure. We drive our car somewhere, that's infrastructure. So he's talking about planning for future infrastructure and the need for different levels of government, federal, state and local, to work together and basically create a way that infrastructure can operate in the future without having all these companies going broke or massive overruns in terms of time and costs and that type of thing. Great chat.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Wednesday, the 23rd of March, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you haven't already, make today the day you attempt to listen to Fear and Greed through your smart speaker. Just say, play the Fear and Greed podcast, and away you go. It should be that easy. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.